My son ruins every room he walks into. The words drifted through the half-open doors of the penthouse ballroom, smooth and careless, carried on the soft notes of a jazz band and the low murmur of wealthy laughter. Naomi Carter stopped mid-step in the hallway, one hand still resting on the polished brass handle of the door. For a moment she wondered if she had misheard. But then Adrian Cross laughed quietly, the same confident laugh that had once convinced her he could protect a family, not destroy one. Inside the room, crystal chandeliers cast warm gold light across marble floors and rows of perfectly dressed guests. Glasses of champagne glimmered like tiny stars in manicured hands. At the center of it all stood Adrian in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Naomi had spent on groceries in the last 3 months. Beside him, Vanessa Hale rested her hand lightly on his arm, smiling the way someone smiles when they already believe the world belongs to them. Naomi didn't move. She couldn't, because just a few feet behind her, small shoes tapped softly against the hallway floor. Micah, 7 years old, hair carefully combed, a tiny navy blazer that still smelled faintly of the department store dressing room, where Naomi had convinced him he looked like a little gentleman. In his hands he carried a rectangular box wrapped in blue paper and crooked tape, his gift for his father. "Mom," Micah whispered, his voice hopeful and unsure. Naomi quickly wiped the expression from her face before turning around. "Hey, sweetheart." But Micah had already peeked past her into the glowing room beyond the doors. His brown eyes searched the crowd until they found Adrian. "There he is," Micah said softly, excitement lifting his voice. Naomi opened her mouth to stop him, but it was already too late. The boy stepped past her and pushed the ballroom door open wider. Music spilled into the hallway. Conversations paused for just a second as guests noticed the small figure walking across polished marble floors. Micah moved carefully, the gift box clutched against his chest like something fragile and important. Naomi followed several steps behind, her heartbeat growing louder with every inch he crossed. Adrian saw him before anyone else did. For a split second, something unreadable crossed his face. Surprise, maybe, or irritation. Vanessa leaned closer to him and said something. Naomi couldn't hear, her lips curling slightly as she glanced toward the child approaching. Micah finally reached the edge of the gathering. "Dad?" he said, lifting the present with both hands. The room grew quieter. Adrian looked down at the box as if it had appeared out of nowhere. A few guests shifted awkwardly, unsure whether this was meant to be a touching family moment or an interruption. Adrian didn't bend down. He didn't smile. He simply exhaled through his nose and looked toward one of the house managers standing nearby. "Take him upstairs," Adrian said calmly, as if discussing a misplaced coat. "We're in the middle of something." The manager hesitated. Micah didn't move. "But I made this for you," the boy said quietly, holding the gift a little higher. Naomi saw the moment Micah's excitement faltered, like a light dimming behind his eyes. Adrian's expression remained perfectly composed. "Not now," he replied, turning slightly back toward Vanessa and the waiting guests. Naomi stepped forward then, her heart pounding as she reached Micah's side. The boy's fingers tightened around the gift box. And in that instant, Naomi realized something with sudden, painful clarity. The worst part wasn't what Adrian had said. It was that he meant it. Micah did not understand why the room had suddenly become so quiet. He only knew that everyone was looking at him. The chandeliers above reflected in the marble floor beneath his shoes, and for a moment he stared down at his own small reflection, holding the blue-wrapped box. Naomi felt the change in the air immediately, the way conversations had paused just long enough for discomfort to settle over the crowd like dust. Somewhere behind them the band continued playing, but the music now sounded distant, almost hollow. Naomi gently placed her hand on Micah's shoulder. She could feel how tense the boy had become. His little fingers were gripping the present so tightly the paper had begun to wrinkle along the edges. "Mom," Micah whispered, barely loud enough for her to hear. "Did Dad forget I was coming tonight?" The question landed in Naomi's chest like a stone. For a second she could not breathe. She forced a soft smile, kneeling slightly beside him so their faces were level. "No, sweetheart," she said carefully, smoothing the sleeve of his blazer. "He just did not know you had a surprise for him." Micah looked back toward Adrian, who was already turning away, his attention drifting back to Vanessa and the circle of guests around him. Vanessa leaned close to Adrian's ear and said something that made him smile faintly. The smile was small, polite, effortless. Naomi had seen that smile hundreds of times in business magazines and charity galas. It was the smile of a man who always knew the room belonged to him. But she realized something painful as she watched him now. It was never the smile he used for his son. The house manager approached carefully, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly. Mr. Cross asked that the young man be taken upstairs for a while. Naomi stood slowly, keeping her arm around Micah. "We heard him," she replied quietly. The manager gave a nervous nod and stepped back, relieved not to be forced further into the moment. Micah was still staring at Adrian. "Maybe he did not see me," the boy said, hope returning to his voice in a fragile way that made Naomi's chest tighten. "Maybe if I go closer." Naomi gently guided him back a step. "Hey," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Why do not we give him the present later tonight?" Micah hesitated. The boy looked down at the box in his hands. "But I made it for him today," he said. "In art class." Naomi felt the words like another quiet blow. She could imagine exactly how it had happened. Micah sitting at a classroom table with colored paper and glue sticks, carefully folding cardboard and decorating it with crooked stars, thinking about how proud his father might be. Around them, guests had started speaking again in low, polite voices, pretending not to notice the uncomfortable moment unfolding at the center of the room. A woman near the bar lifted her glass and whispered something to the man beside her. Naomi could feel their eyes. She could feel the weight of the room's curiosity. Micah's breathing changed slightly, faster now, and Naomi immediately recognized the signs. When Micah became overwhelmed, the world often felt too loud and too bright all at once. Naomi knelt beside him again and placed a steady hand against his back. "Hey," she murmured, her voice calm and slow. "Look at me for a second." Micah did, his eyes glossy with confusion. "Let us get some fresh air," Naomi said gently. "Just you and me." The boy nodded after a moment. He still held the gift tightly against his chest as Naomi guided him toward the hallway again. Behind them, Adrian Cross raised his champagne glass as someone made a toast. Laughter followed. Naomi did not turn around. But as she walked away with her son beside her, one quiet realization settled deeper and deeper in her mind. Tonight was not just another embarrassing moment to survive. Something fundamental had shifted, and she could already feel it beginning to break. The hallway outside the ballroom felt almost unreal after the bright noise they had just left behind. The heavy doors closed softly, muting the laughter and music until the sounds became little more than a distant echo. Naomi guided Micah toward a quieter corner near the tall windows that overlooked the city. 40 floors below them, Manhattan stretched out in ribbons of glowing traffic and silver skyscrapers. Normally Micah loved that view. Tonight he barely looked at it. The boy leaned against his mother, still clutching the small blue box against his chest. Naomi could feel the quick rhythm of his breathing through the fabric of his blazer. She crouched down beside him, her voice calm and steady the way the pediatric cardiologist had taught her months ago. "Look at me, Micah," she said softly. "Slow breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth." Micah tried to follow her example. His shoulders lifted with a careful breath, then lowered again. Naomi counted quietly with him under her breath, her hand resting gently between his shoulder blades. After several moments, his breathing steadied. The tight line between his eyebrows softened. Naomi exhaled slowly, though she kept her hand on his back a little longer, just to be sure. The doctors had explained everything clearly during the long afternoon in the hospital last winter. Stress could trigger the episodes. Loud environments, emotional shocks, too much excitement all at once. Naomi had memorized every warning sign. She had rearranged her entire life around preventing those moments. What she had never expected was that the greatest risk would come from inside her own home. Micah finally looked up at her. "I did not mean to interrupt," he said quietly. Dad looked busy. Naomi felt something tighten in her chest again, but she kept her expression warm. "You did nothing wrong," she said firmly. "You wanted to give him a present. That is a kind thing." Micah studied the box again, turning it slowly in his hands. One corner of the wrapping paper had come loose. Beneath it, Naomi could see the cardboard lid he had painted bright blue earlier that afternoon. "It is a memory box," Micah explained softly. For Dad to keep important things. Naomi swallowed. That sounds like a wonderful gift. Micah nodded a little, though the excitement from earlier had faded into something quieter now. He sat down on the carpeted bench by the window, swinging his legs slowly. For a moment, they watched the city together in silence. Inside the ballroom, another wave of applause broke out, followed by cheerful voices rising in celebration. Naomi could imagine exactly what was happening without looking. Adrian probably raising a glass. Vanessa smiling beside him. The guests laughing at some clever remark that made the evening feel effortless again. Micah tilted his head slightly as the noise drifted through the door. Are they celebrating something? He asked. Naomi hesitated before answering. Your father is hosting an important event tonight. Micah nodded thoughtfully, though his eyes remained on the skyline instead of the ballroom. Mom, he said after a moment, his voice careful again. Do you think Dad would like the box later? Naomi opened her mouth, then paused. For years she had tried to protect Micah from disappointment by softening the truth. But tonight the words felt heavier than usual. He should, she finally said quietly. Micah accepted that answer with a small nod. The boy rested the box beside him and leaned his head against his mother's shoulder. Naomi wrapped an arm around him, holding him close as the city lights flickered beyond the glass. And as she sat there in the quiet hallway, listening to the distant laughter of the party they had just left, one thought slowly formed in her mind with growing clarity. Tonight had revealed something she could no longer pretend not to see. The distance between Adrian Cross and his son was no longer small enough to ignore. And if she did nothing, that distance would only continue to grow. Naomi did not expect to still be sitting there when the hours slipped by unnoticed. She had kept her arm around Micah as he slowly relaxed, his breathing more steady now, but the silence between them felt heavy in a way she had not anticipated. The noise from the ballroom seemed further away, but she knew it was still going on, still full of laughter and champagne toasts, still full of the life she used to belong to. She glanced down at Micah, whose small hand rested in her lap. His eyes were closed, but his brows were furrowed, as though he was still thinking about something. Naomi ran her fingers gently through his hair, the familiar motion helping her settle her thoughts. She had spent the last 6 years adjusting her entire life for this moment, for this child. Everything she had done, every job she had taken, every sacrifice she had made, was for Micah's well-being. But now, she could not help but feel the weight of the distance between her and Adrian, the distance that had only grown since their last real conversation. The man she had married, the man she had trusted, was somewhere in that room, surrounded by people who had never questioned the way he treated her or their son. He was the man everyone admired, the man who could do no wrong in the eyes of his colleagues, his friends. And yet, Micah had been left behind, unnoticed. Naomi looked down at the boy in her arms, and something inside her hardened. She had known for a while now that Adrian's attention had drifted, but tonight, in that moment, the truth became undeniable. Micah did not just need her. He needed someone who would put him first, someone who would fight for him when no one else would. And Adrian, for all his wealth and power, had failed to see that. Micah stirred in her arms, his small voice breaking the silence. Mom, he whispered, his eyes still closed but his hand tightening around hers. Naomi smiled softly, brushing a tear away before he could see. Yes, sweetheart, she replied, her voice steady, even though her heart was beginning to ache in places she had tried to keep hidden. Do you think we'll be okay? The question was simple, but it hit her harder than she expected. Naomi knew what Micah meant. He wanted to know if, after tonight, after everything that had happened, they would be safe. They would be okay. Naomi took a deep breath, squeezing his hand gently. Yes, Micah. We'll be more than okay. We'll be just fine. Micah nodded slowly, still holding her hand, his body relaxing further. But Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something deep inside her had changed. She had spent so long trying to make things work, trying to keep her family together, but tonight had shown her something different. Adrian's love was conditional. It was built on the things that could be seen, the events, the meetings, the public appearances. But when it came to the real, everyday moments that required a parent's love, a parent's attention, he had chosen to look the other way. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet of the room fill her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel trapped. She felt free. In the end, It wasn't about what Adrian wanted or what he had to offer. It was about what Micah needed. And that was something only she could give him. She stood slowly, lifting Micah into her arms. He clung to her like he always did when he was tired, his small face pressed against her shoulder. Naomi smiled to herself, a quiet strength rising inside her. "Come on, little man," she whispered. "Let's go home." As she turned toward the door, the noise from the ballroom started to fade, and all she could hear was the steady beat of her own heart and the soft rhythm of Micah's breathing in her ear. Tonight, everything was different, and she knew, deep down, that she had made the right choice. Naomi stepped out of the elevator into the quiet hallway of their new apartment. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. Micah was already asleep in the bedroom, tucked in under the soft blankets she had chosen just for him. The room was small, but it was theirs. Everything about it felt real. Everything about it felt like a new beginning. She let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. The noise, the glitter of the parties, the endless events that she had once thought were part of their life. All of it felt distant now. They had left all of it behind, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she cared. She moved into the living room, her eyes taking in the space she had chosen with care. The walls were bare, but they would fill up soon. The window faced the street, a quiet side of the city she had always overlooked. She smiled to herself, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. There was no more pretending, no more waiting for someone to notice, no more playing a part in someone else's world. This was real. Naomi's thoughts drifted back to the events of the night, to the moment she had walked away from the penthouse and had not looked back. She had known for months that things were slipping, but tonight had made it undeniable. Adrian had always been about appearances, about keeping up the image of a perfect family, but when it came down to the one thing that mattered, when it came to Micah, he had turned his back. No, it wasn't about being abandoned by him. It was about the simple truth that Micah deserved more. She had tried for years to make it work, to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother. But Adrian had never asked her to make a choice. He had never demanded that she choose him, or them. And now, with a calm certainty, Naomi realized she had made the choice for herself. She didn't need to explain herself to anyone. No one but Micah. She moved to the kitchen, feeling the familiar rhythm of preparing a meal, one she had not had to make for anyone but herself in a long time. The stove was quiet, the apartment silent, and the weight of the day began to sink in. It wasn't just about the decision to leave. It wasn't just about the move. It was about what she had taken back from it all. Her own peace. Her own voice. Naomi took a deep breath, letting the silence fill her. The life they had left behind would fade away, and though it had hurt to walk away, she knew it was the right thing to do. She could already hear Micah's soft breaths from the bedroom. Her son, the one constant in her life, the one person who always mattered, was asleep, safe in this small but real home they had created. She smiled again, feeling the peace settle inside her. This was where they belonged now. It didn't matter how much the world had changed around them. All that mattered was that they had each other. And that, she thought, was more than enough. Naomi sat at the small kitchen table, her fingers tracing the edges of the coffee mug in front of her. It was early, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. She had always been an early riser, but this morning, the quiet felt different. The city outside was just beginning to stir, the soft hum of traffic barely audible through the window. Micah was still asleep, his small body tucked tightly under the covers in the bedroom, but Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. It wasn't just the move. It wasn't just leaving Adrian behind. It was the realization that she had been holding her breath for years, waiting for something, anything, to shift. And now that it had, she was finally exhaling. She stared out the window for a long time, her mind drifting back to the years she had spent trying to hold it all together. The long nights, the endless questions, the feeling of always being on the edge of something she couldn't quite name. But now, in the stillness of this small apartment, she felt like she could finally breathe again. Naomi stood up slowly, her legs still a little stiff from the long drive yesterday. She stretched, her arms reaching toward the ceiling as if to touch the promise of a new day. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. As she moved toward the bedroom to check on Micah, she stopped in the doorway, watching him sleep. His small form was curled up in a ball, his chest rising and falling gently. He was her world, the only thing that had kept her going through it all. And now, with everything they had left behind, she was going to make sure he never had to face that kind of uncertainty again. She walked over to the bed and gently brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. He shifted slightly, but didn't wake. Naomi smiled softly and placed a light kiss on his head. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring him or herself. As the morning sun began to warm the apartment, Naomi felt something deep within her shift. It wasn't the weight of the past anymore, but the quiet certainty of the future. No matter what Adrian did or didn't do, no matter how much the world had changed, she was here now, with Micah. And that was enough. Naomi left the bedroom and moved toward the small kitchen once more. She stood in front of the sink for a moment, staring out the window as the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the city in a soft golden light. A new chapter had begun, and this time, she would be the one writing it. Naomi spent the next few days settling into the new routine, each day a small step toward rebuilding what had been broken. Micah, though still adjusting to the change, seemed to find comfort in the quiet of their new home. The noise of the city was distant here, a soft hum rather than the overwhelming roar it had been in their old life. At first, the silence felt strange to Naomi, an absence she had never really allowed herself to experience. She had always been so used to the constant buzz of Adrian's world, the ever-present hum of his expectations, his plans, his unspoken demands. But now, as the days passed, she began to see the beauty in this calm. They didn't need the chaos. They didn't need the grand gestures or the constant affirmation that came with the life they had left behind. What they needed was each other. It was a small, simple thing. Micah was still young, still too innocent to understand the full weight of what had happened, but he seemed to sense that something had shifted. He was quieter, more thoughtful these days, often sitting by the window with his coloring books, the way he used to when he was younger, before the weight of their old life had caught up with him. Naomi would sit with him sometimes, helping him with his drawings, but mostly, she just watched him. She watched how his shoulders seemed to relax more each day, how his laugh came more easily now, and how he had begun to open up to her again. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. One afternoon, as Naomi was unpacking the last of the boxes, her phone buzzed. She saw Adrian's name flash on the screen, and for a moment, her heart skipped. She hadn't heard from him since they left. She had told herself she wasn't ready to talk to him, not yet. But now, as she stood in the quiet of their new home, with Micah playing quietly in the next room, she wondered if she should. She took a deep breath before answering. "Hello." There was a long pause before Adrian's voice came through, low and guarded. "Naomi." His voice sounded different, more tired than it had been the last time they spoke. I need to talk to you about Micah." Naomi's chest tightened. She could feel the familiar weight of his words even through the phone. "What about him?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. I want to see him. I want to make sure he's okay." Adrian's voice faltered, something in it breaking through the usual confidence he wore like armor. Naomi looked toward the bedroom, where Micah was playing, blissfully unaware of the conversation she was having. "He's fine," she said softly. "He's better than fine." There was a long silence before Adrian spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Naomi, I never meant for things to end this way. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to lose him." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of them press against her chest. She wanted to feel angry, to tell him everything she had been holding back for months, but instead, all she felt was tired. Tired of the games, tired of the lies, tired of the pretending. "Adrian, it's not about what you want anymore," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's about Micah. It's about us. And we're fine now. We're okay." There was another long silence, this one stretching between them like an ocean. When Adrian spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I miss you, Naomi." Naomi bit her lip, a tear slipping down her cheek despite her best efforts to stay composed. She wiped it away quickly, not wanting to let him see the weakness he had often preyed on in the past. "I know," she said quietly, "but I'm not coming back, Adrian. This is it. It's over." And with that, she hung up the phone. She stood there for a moment, the silence in the room settling around her like a thick blanket. The decision had been made, long before today. She had already chosen them. Micah, herself, their future. As she walked back into the bedroom, Micah looked up at her with a smile, and Naomi smiled back. She had made the right choice. They were finally free. It had been a week since Naomi had hung up the phone with Adrian. The weight of that conversation still lingered in the back of her mind, but each day it seemed to matter less. The new routine was slowly settling in, and with it, a sense of peace she had not known she had been craving. Micah had adjusted more quickly than she expected. He was beginning to thrive in ways that made Naomi's heart swell with pride. He spent his mornings drawing, his favorite pastime, and his afternoons exploring the small park just a block away. Naomi had started volunteering at a local community center, finding a rhythm she had not realized she was missing. The small moments, the kind she had once thought were too ordinary, became her greatest joys. But there were still times, usually late at night when the apartment was quiet and the city outside was almost still, when Naomi would lie in bed and think about what had happened. She would replay the conversations, the decisions, the moments where everything had started to change. And each time, she came to the same conclusion. She had made the right choice. Still, there was a part of her that wondered if Adrian would try to reach out again. He had said he wanted to be a part of Micah's life, but Naomi had seen the pattern before. He wanted things to be on his terms, when it suited him. He wanted to play the part of the father when it was convenient. But when it came to the day-to-day responsibility, he had always turned away. She had hoped, for Micah's sake, that Adrian might change. But she was no longer holding her breath. Naomi stood in front of the small mirror in the hallway, adjusting the collar of her jacket as she prepared to head out for another meeting at the community center. She didn't recognize the woman staring back at her, not in a bad way, but in a way that reminded her of how much she had grown. The reflection was strong, focused, and whole in a way she had not been in years. It was the woman she had always been beneath the layers of what she had pretended to be. She had thought that leaving Adrian would be the hardest thing she had ever done. But now, standing here, she knew it had been the only way. Micah deserved better. She deserved better. And somehow, in this small apartment, with Micah's laughter filling the rooms, they were finally creating the life they had always deserved. As Naomi walked toward the door, she paused for a moment, her hand resting on the doorknob. She glanced over her shoulder at the small living room. Micah's shoes were scattered near the entrance, his favorite toys lying on the couch, a crayon drawing of a dog half finished on the coffee table. It wasn't the life she had once envisioned, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. She smiled to herself and stepped out into the cool morning air, ready to face whatever the day might bring. This was her life now, and it was enough. Naomi returned home after another long day at the community center, her mind buzzing with all the new faces she had met and the connections she had made. It felt good to be useful, to be a part of something that mattered. She had never realized how much she missed that feeling of being needed, of contributing beyond just being a mother. It was the kind of fulfillment that had always been missing from her life, overshadowed by the expectations that came with being married to Adrian. She closed the door behind her, taking a deep breath as she set her bag down on the kitchen counter. Micah was in the living room, sprawled on the floor with his toys, humming softly to himself. He looked up as she entered, his eyes lighting up. "Mom, look, I made a spaceship." He held up a drawing, his small hands proudly displaying a colorful sketch of what could only be described as a very imaginative spacecraft. Naomi smiled, her heart warming at the sight. She knelt beside him, taking a closer look at his drawing. "It's amazing, Micah," she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "You've got a real talent for this." Micah beamed, his smile wide and bright, and Naomi couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was the life they were building now, one where Micah could be himself without fear of being dismissed or ignored. The warmth in her chest deepened as she thought back to all the times Adrian had failed to notice the little things, the moments when he had been too caught up in his own world to see his sons. But now, in this quiet apartment, there was space for Micah to thrive. There was space for Naomi to finally be the mother she had always wanted to be. As she sat down beside him, Micah turned his attention back to his spaceship, talking animatedly about the different parts of the ship and how it would fly to the moon. Naomi listened, her heart full, as she realized that this, right here, was what she had been fighting for. Not the grand gestures, not the promises made in the heat of the moment, but the simple, quiet moments where Micah could just be a kid. As she watched him, Naomi thought about the call from Adrian a few days ago. She had been tempted, just for a moment, to soften, to let him back into their lives. But each time she thought about it, she reminded herself that Micah's future wasn't something to be negotiated. It wasn't about Adrian's guilt or his desire to fix things. It was about what was best for her son. And what was best for Micah was the stability and peace they had found in this new life. Naomi reached out and ruffled Micah's hair gently. "You know, I think that spaceship is going to make it to the moon for sure," she said, her voice light with affection. Micah giggled, nodding eagerly. "I'm going to make it go even higher." Naomi laughed along with him, the sound of it echoing softly in the room. She didn't need to look back anymore. She didn't need to wonder if things could be different. This was the life she had chosen, and it was enough. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Naomi felt that it was full of possibilities. Micah had everything he needed right here, with her, and that was all that mattered. The phone call came when Naomi least expected it. She was in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner for herself and Micah, the familiar hum of the stove filling the room. It was just another quiet evening, the kind she had grown used to, when the screen of her phone lit up with Adrian's name once again. She froze for a moment, staring at the screen as if the call itself could somehow reach out and pull her back into the past. Her heart skipped. The rational part of her knew it was a call she didn't need to answer, but a part of her, the part that still remembered the man she had once loved, hesitated. She set the spoon down, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and took a deep breath before answering. "Hello," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. But there was something about hearing his voice again that made her pulse quicken. "Naomi," Adrian said, his voice softer than it had been the last time they spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said. About Micah." Naomi felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "What about him?" she asked, her tone guarded. There was a brief pause before Adrian continued. "I know I haven't been there for him. I know I messed up. But I'm ready to make it right. I want to see him, Naomi. I want to be there for him. For both of you." The words landed in Naomi's chest like a heavy weight, and she stood still, listening to the silence that stretched between them. Adrian's voice, though sincere, carried an undercurrent of guilt, but Naomi had heard it before. It wasn't the first time he had promised to make things right. She closed her eyes briefly, letting out a slow breath before replying. "Adrian," she said, her voice soft but firm, "you can't just show up and expect everything to be okay. It doesn't work like that. Micah needs more than words. He needs consistency. He needs you to actually show up, not when it's convenient for you, but every single day." There was another long pause on the other end of the line. She could almost hear the weight of his regret, the silence that followed thick with things left unsaid. "I know," Adrian finally replied, his voice quiet. "I know I failed him. I don't want to lose him. I can't lose him." Naomi's heart softened just slightly, but she didn't let it show. "You've already lost him, Adrian. You've lost both of us. You had the chance to be there, and you chose not to. Now it's too late for promises." The words felt heavier as she spoke them, but they were the truth. She had to remind herself that what she was doing now was for Micah. This was about his future, not Adrian's guilt. "I need you to understand something," Naomi continued, her voice steady despite the emotion bubbling just below the surface. "Micah and I, we're doing just fine. We're building a life for ourselves. I'm not asking for anything from you anymore. I'm not going to keep hoping that one day you'll change. I've given that enough time." She felt the weight of the words as they left her mouth, as if some invisible burden had lifted off her shoulders. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, there was a finality to his voice. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Naomi. I'm sorry for everything." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Goodbye, Adrian," she said softly, before ending the call. Naomi stood in the quiet of the kitchen for a long moment, the phone still in her hand. The weight of the conversation lingered in the air, but there was something else there, too. Relief. The finality of it felt like a door closing, one that she had been trying to close for far too long. She set the phone down on the counter and walked over to where Micah was sitting at the table, working on his drawing again. His small face lit up as she approached, and Naomi smiled down at him, her heart swelling with the love she had for him. "How's the spaceship coming along?" she asked, her voice light. Micah grinned up at her, his excitement returning. "It's going to be the fastest one ever," Naomi leaned down and kissed his forehead, her heart full. "I know it will," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She stepped back, standing tall and steady, knowing that no matter what came next, she and Micah were ready to face it together. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly free. 2 weeks had passed since the call, and Naomi had not heard from Adrian again. The silence that followed felt almost comfortable now, like a heavy fog lifting, leaving only clarity in its wake. Micah had adjusted beautifully to their new life, thriving in the quiet space they had created for themselves. The days felt longer, but in the best way possible. Naomi had found a rhythm, balancing her time between work at the community center, caring for Micah, and the small joys of their daily routines. Each night, as she tucked Micah into bed, the weight of the past seemed to fade further. The mornings had become their time. Time for art, time for playing games, time for laughter that filled the apartment in a way it had never done before. One evening, as Naomi was cleaning up after dinner, there was a knock at the door. She froze for a moment, uncertain of who it could be. She wasn't expecting anyone. Micah was playing with his toys in the living room, humming softly to himself, completely unaware of the visitor. Naomi walked cautiously toward the door, her mind running through the possibilities. She opened it slowly, her heart beating a little faster than usual. Standing on the other side was a man she had not seen in weeks, a man she had not expected to see standing on her doorstep. "Adrian," she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the surprise bubbling up inside her. He looked different. His suit was a little disheveled, his hair slightly unkempt, as though he had been traveling or running errands all day. His face was softer than she remembered, but there was something more tired in his eyes. "Naomi," he said, his voice almost hesitant, as if he were unsure of how to proceed. "Can we talk?" Naomi hesitated, her hand still on the doorknob, and for a moment, she considered closing the door. She had told herself that there would be no more second chances, no more waiting for Adrian to change. But something in the way he stood there, a quiet vulnerability in his posture, made her pause. She took a deep breath before stepping aside and letting him in. "You have 5 minutes," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. Adrian nodded, stepping inside, and they walked to the living room where Micah was still engrossed in his drawing. He didn't look up at first, too focused on his work, but when he finally did, his eyes widened. Adrian's gaze softened as he looked at his son, but Naomi could see the hesitation in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Naomi watched him carefully, her arms crossed. "You've got your 5 minutes," she reminded him. Adrian finally spoke, his voice quiet. "I know I've failed you both," he said, his words slow measured. "I've thought a lot about what you said, and I realize that I've been selfish. I wanted to make everything look good, to have the perfect life, but I forgot what really mattered. I forgot Micah. And I forgot you." Naomi didn't answer right away. She didn't know what to say. She had heard these words before, in different forms, at different times, but they had never felt real. "I've tried to change," Adrian continued, his eyes meeting hers. "I want to be part of his life, Naomi. I want to be there for both of you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I can't change what's been done, but I want to try." Naomi stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of his words pressing against her chest. She had wanted to hear this, had wanted him to say this for so long, but now that he had, she didn't know if it was enough. She looked over at Micah, who was now watching them with wide eyes, his little hands still holding his crayons. Naomi knew that Micah had to come first, always. "It's not about forgiveness, Adrian," she said quietly, her voice steady. "It's about what you do from here. You can't just show up when it's convenient for you. Micah needs someone who's there for him every day, not someone who comes in and out when they feel like it. He deserves better than that." Adrian's expression faltered slightly, but he nodded. "I understand," he said, his voice softer now. "I just want to be a part of his life. I don't want to be the kind of father who regrets not being there when it mattered." Naomi took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling in. She wasn't sure what the future held, or if Adrian would truly follow through on his promises, but she knew that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to face it. "We'll see," Naomi said, her voice calm but resolute. "But it's going to take more than words." Adrian nodded again, his shoulders sinking slightly as if he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He turned to look at Micah, who was now staring up at him with cautious curiosity. "I'll prove it to you," Adrian said quietly, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "I promise." Naomi watched him for a moment longer before turning to Micah, who had returned to his drawing, his crayons moving steadily across the page. For now, that was enough. Whatever happened next, Naomi knew one thing for certain. She and Micah were no longer waiting for anyone. They were finally living the life they deserved. It had been 2 weeks since Adrian had visited their apartment, and Naomi had noticed a change in him. He kept his distance, but he had been trying. He showed up for Micah's soccer game, his first in months, and for the first time in a long while, Micah seemed to light up at the sight of his father in the stands. Naomi could see the hesitation in Adrian's eyes when he spoke to Micah after the game, asking about school, asking about his friends. It was clear that Adrian was trying, but Naomi wasn't ready to trust it completely. She had seen this before, the promises, the attempts to play the role of the father when it was convenient. But this time, it felt different. Adrian was no longer just showing up when he needed to feel like the good guy. He was putting in the effort, in small ways, in ways Naomi had never seen before. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it was there. For Micah's sake, Naomi decided to give him a chance. But she wasn't going to make it easy for him. She had been the one to hold it all together for so long, and she wasn't going to hand that control over just because Adrian had said the right words. She had been down that road too many times. One evening, as Naomi was preparing dinner, Micah came running into the kitchen, a wide grin on his face. "Mom, guess what? Dad's taking me to the park this Saturday. Just the two of us." Naomi stopped what she was doing, her heart tightening in her chest. She had been so focused on the present, on their new life, that she hadn't really considered what would happen when Adrian tried to insert himself back into their lives. She hadn't thought about how Micah might react. "That's great, sweetie," Naomi said, her voice steady but cautious. "I'm glad you two are spending time together." Micah bounced up and down in excitement, oblivious to the swirling thoughts in Naomi's mind. She forced a smile, trying to mask her concern. Adrian wanted to be a part of their lives again, but Naomi still couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't about Micah. It was about Adrian's need to feel redeemed, to fix what had been broken. It wasn't about the effort, it was about the timing. Still, she pushed those thoughts aside for now. Micah was happy. He deserved to be happy. And if Adrian was willing to show up for him, even in small ways, maybe that was enough. Saturday arrived, and Naomi watched as Micah eagerly slipped on his favorite sneakers, his excitement palpable. "I'll be back soon, Mom," he called as he grabbed his jacket and ran out the door. Naomi stood at the window, watching as Adrian pulled up in his car, the two of them waving at her before they drove off. She stood there for a moment, the silence of the house settling around her like a blanket. She wasn't sure what would happen next. She wasn't sure if Adrian would keep his promises, or if this would be just another attempt to make himself feel better. But one thing was certain, Micah was smiling, and for now, that was all that mattered. Hours later, when Micah returned, he was practically glowing. "We had so much fun, Mom. We played soccer, and then Dad bought me ice cream, and we talked about everything. I think he really wants to be around more." Naomi smiled, her heart softening as she watched her son's enthusiasm. "I'm glad, sweetie," she said, her voice steady, but her mind still racing. She wasn't ready to completely trust Adrian, but she could see the joy in Micah's eyes. Maybe, just maybe, this time, things would be different. The journey wasn't going to be easy, but they had come this far. Naomi knew that she and Micah were going to be okay, no matter what happened next. Weeks passed, and the changes in their lives continued, small but steady. Naomi had begun to adjust to this new rhythm, where every day felt like a fresh start, each one more filled with possibility than the last. Micah continued to thrive in the new environment, his laughter ringing through their small apartment, a sound Naomi had come to cherish deeply. The uncertainty she had once felt about their future was gradually replaced by a quiet confidence. She had built a life for them, one that didn't depend on anyone else, not even Adrian. Despite their progress, there were still moments, late at night, when Naomi would think about what had happened. Adrian's attempts to be present for Micah were inconsistent, but they were there, at least for now. Micah seemed to sense the change in his father, though his excitement never wavered. Naomi couldn't help but notice the way Adrian showed up for Micah during those small moments. On the days he picked him up from school or took him to the park. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Yet, Naomi still couldn't forget how many times Adrian had promised to change, how many times he had left her to shoulder the burden of their family's well-being. She knew that she could never trust him in the same way again. There would always be a distance between them, even if it wasn't visible. The phone rang one evening while Naomi was sitting on the couch with Micah, who was drawing with crayons on the coffee table. It was late, and she hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" she said, her voice cautious, though she already knew who it was. "Naomi." Adrian's voice came through, steady but tinged with something else. "I know I haven't been around much, but I wanted to check in on Micah." Naomi sat up straighter, her fingers tightening around the phone. She glanced at Micah, who was too absorbed in his drawing to pay attention. "He's fine," she replied, her tone neutral. "Everything's good." "I know I haven't done enough," Adrian continued, his voice quieter now. "I want you to know that I'm not giving up on him. I know I can't expect everything to change overnight, but I'm trying, Naomi." She let the silence stretch between them, her mind processing his words. Adrian had always been good at saying the right things, at making promises when he saw fit. But Naomi was no longer looking for words. She needed actions. "I appreciate you calling," she said finally, her voice soft, but firm. "But you need to understand, Adrian, that Micah's well-being isn't something you can fix with a few gestures. He needs stability, consistency, and he's getting that with me. You're welcome to be a part of his life, but it has to be more than just showing up when it suits you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Adrian spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost resigned. "I get it," he said. "I know I can't just expect to walk back into your lives like nothing happened, but I want to try, Naomi. I really do. And I'll keep trying, no matter how long it takes." Naomi's grip on the phone loosened slightly. She had heard these words before, but something in his voice made her think that, for once, he might actually mean them. "I'm not going to promise anything, Adrian," she said softly, her voice steady. "But I'll let you be a part of his life. Just don't make it more complicated than it has to be. Micah deserves better than that." Adrian was silent for a moment, as if weighing her words. "I understand," he finally said. "Thank you, Naomi. I'll be better. For him." Naomi hung up the phone, the weight of the conversation settling over her like a quiet storm. She looked over at Micah, who was still lost in his drawing. Despite everything, despite the uncertainty and the broken promises, she felt a sense of peace. They were making it work, day by day, and that was enough for her. She had learned the hard way that sometimes the best thing you could do was let go, to stop trying to change people, and instead focus on what you could control. And what she could control was her own life, and Micah's. As the evening light faded outside the window, Naomi smiled to herself. Whatever the future held, she knew that she and Micah would face it together, stronger than ever.